going to take the North and never give it back.
So that's a good pick. You get the corner. I got to go bold, right? I got to go bold for this.
Yeah, she's got some nice long
Welcome back to the Unbearable Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Barron, and today we are going to be breaking down the advanced analytics, the metrics, whatever you want to call it, the breakdown for the Chicago Bears versus the Tennessee Titans. And we're going to be going through all sorts of depth. We're going to talk about advanced analytics from PFF, from ESPN Analytics, from Next Gen Stats, DVOA, you name it. We're going to be breaking it down on this show. So we're going to start out with the best grades and just kind of overall Chicago Bear ratings that we have out there from the metrics, but then also break down Caleb Williams' performance, break down the running game, receiving game, O-line, D-line, coverage stats, you name it. We're going to break it down today. So if you love this type of content, make sure to like and subscribe out there on YouTube. Show this video some love. And also, if you're watching, rate 5 stars. It shows that you love what's out there inside the podcast. And you can always download the podcast everywhere that you get your podcast. So let's get right into it and break down where people have the Bears right now. So before we get into the PFF grades, I want to just talk about what some other indexes kind of have the Bears roster at with how they played on Sunday. So overall, if you just look at the general PFF grades and relate them to other teams, the Bears are actually 8th in PFF grades across the team. So this factors in special teams, defense, offense, and then kind of averages it all out. So 8th overall according to PFF grades. Now, if you keep going down, so I have PFF grades, DVOA that used to be owned by Football Outsiders. DVOA is a great metric to just kind of see where certain teams are at. We've used this before, and a lot of sports bettors leverage this. And then we also go through ESPN efficiency ratings, and then also ESPN Analytics Football Power Index. So as we go through that, PFF grades have the Bears as the highest, with the number 8th overall team. Then DVOA has the Bears ranked 18th. The ESPN efficiency numbers have 12, and Football Power Index is at 22. But as you continue to look at it, everyone has the Bears at offensive rank number 25, except for DVOA at 28. But then you go over to the defense, and everybody has the Bears at 4, except DVOA at 7. Special teams, DVOA and FPI have the Bears at 4. PFF has them graded as the best special teams, and the efficiency ratings of ESPN have them at 17th. So I guess Velus Jones dropping that kickoff really did drop them down in the efficiency ratings. But overall, let me know what you think about these stats out here, because the thing that I think really stands out is right now, like what we've said with this Bears team, middle of the pack team. But what we saw with the defense was an elite defense. That's where the number 4 ratings make sense. Number 7 ratings for DVOA. Those are all great things because they dominated. And when we go into the larger depth of the defensive line, there's some really cool stats out there just kind of showing how great this defensive line did play. And special teams, all good. So, as we all know, the story is the offense. And the thing that I'm happy about is I didn't see 30, 31, 32. So even though that the offense was bad, the ratings and the analytics, they're still like, hey, this isn't a bad team. And when you actually watch the tape too, you realize that there was just a lot of mishaps that happened with this offense. So now I'm not going to tell you today that all of a sudden the offense is great and now everything is all peachy, but it's a lot better than what I think, yet as you can see with those ratings, a lot better than what people think. So let's actually go into the grades from PFF, and I want to just kind of put an asterisk with this too. So PFF grades are not the end all be all. Any of the stats that we talk about today is not a silver bullet to tell you how good a team is or how good a team isn't. These are all stats, and the reason why there's so many stats out there is because you have to take each one with a grain of salt, and each one is good at projecting what a given individual did. So let's talk through PFF's highest and lowest graded players, and we'll start out with the defense. Because with the defense, number 1 was Jalen Johnson with a 92.3 grade. Obviously, he was a beast. Then, as you go down, Darrell Taylor, 78, Marcus Walker, 76, Tyreek Stevenson, T.J. Edwards, and all graded in the 70s, and then Andrew Billings, Kevin Byard, and Javon Dexter, all in the upper 60s. Now, keep in mind, 60 is average, so being in the upper 60s, good stuff. So I know sometimes people see the 60s and they're like, yo, what's going on with this? So I wanted to kind of show some of these just so that as we go through some of the players, some of the stats, it makes a little bit more sense. But then also PFF, on the defensive side, your worst graded players that graded in the 50s, so below average, Byron Cowart, Jaquan Brisker, Montez Sweat, Tremaine Edmonds, and Kyler Gordon. Do I agree with some of those? Not really. I don't think Jaquan Brisker was that bad. I didn't think Kyler Gordon was that bad. And when you look at Tremaine Edmonds, where he was really brought back was in his run defense, which they gave him a 38.8 grade, but a 74.7 coverage grade. And that's where I liked his coverage stats. I liked seeing them. But like I said, right after the show that we recorded on Sunday, it did feel like Tremaine Edmonds was getting pushed back a little bit, in run defense still seems to be one of his weak points. But if we flip over to the offense, the worst grades on offense, number one was Roma Dunze with a 46 grade, Caleb Williams with a 47, right? We know, not great. Then DeAndre Carter, Gerald Everett, Travis Homer, Khalil Herbert, Keenan Allen, and Ryan Bates, all getting below average grades from PFF. And your top grades, this is going to hurt everyone. Don't blame me, blame the grades. Nate Davis was your highest. And I want to say this. When you watch the tape, yet again, what does PFF grade on? They grade on how did the individual do against the person in front of them. And if you base it off of that, he blocked well. But there's the effort, there's the lack, like there's a reason why he was benched. And I felt like it was more of the effort, the blown assignment, like that he got faulted on, rather than when he was blocking someone and someone was in front of him, he ended up blocking him well. But we have more analytics to dive down, not just PFF grades. Then you have Darnell Wright, who I agree with this grade, 72.7. Darnell Wright looked very, very good. The more that I watched, it's like, okay, Darnell, great game for Darnell Wright. Then Velus Jones, yes, Velus Jones on his four small size sample size. DJ Moore, Tevin Jenkins, Mercedes Lewis, and then DeAndre Swift. So that's enough grades for right now. I want to get into the fun stats. I want to get into Caleb Williams, breaking down his actual performance. Like we said, with like the lowest graded players, Caleb Williams, 47.4, not great, right? So like I said, I'm not going to all of a sudden say that he had a great game, because he didn't. It was a bad game. Grades reflect that. But when you look at where he was throwing, he was 0 for 4 throwing past 20 yards. And then inside kind of that 10 to 20 yards, 1 of 3. And really a lot of his passes came up short. A lot of them to the left-hand side, 8 of 10 to the left from 0 to 10 yards. And then 0 for 6 from the middle to the right-hand side. But then the rest of his plays, a lot of behind the line of scrimmage. We saw a total of 6 behind the line of scrimmage, and he completed 5 of those. But if we look at the advanced metrics of what exactly he did, he had a 0.6 EPA, which was 23rd out of 28 players. And if you're curious who was worse when it came down to his overall EPA, or who had worse than him, the thing that made me smile was Jordan Love was actually worse than him. Also, Dak Prescott, Daniel Jones, Bryce Young, Watson. So not great names behind him, but yet again, he didn't have a great game. But it did make me feel better that he had a higher EPA than Jordan Love out there. So for me, that at least makes me smile, puts a little grin on my face to know that he had a better EPA than Jordan Love. But when you look at the other ones, he was 18th out of 28 for his passing EPA, which I thought was pretty high, especially given his performance. But then negative 0.4 rushing EPA, 25th out of 28, which I thought was surprising. But I think they probably factored in the sack and saying, hey, he was trying to scramble, trying to do that and do too much. And then ultimately that ended up happening. But then also more metrics on just his throwing. He was 2.7 seconds time to throw, which was the 12th quickest, far quicker than anything we saw out of Justin Fields from last season. But also his average air yards per completion, which is key, right? So average air until he completed it was 2.7 yards, which was the 4th shortest. The only people that threw it shorter was Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, and Deshaun Watson. So yet again, throwing it short, that was ultimately the game plan. But when you look at his average intended air yards, he actually had the 10th farthest at 7.8 average intended air yards. And then also, this is another interesting stat. And this kind of goes down to the whole accuracy point within Caleb Williams. So there's a stat called expected completion percentage, and then you can go with the completion above expected percentage, which basically means what should he have been completing, and then what did he ultimately end up completing? And when you look at it, NFL Next Gen Stats projected that it should have been a 64.4% expected completion percentage, which then gave him a negative 16.1 completion above expected, which was the third worst in the NFL. So what does that mean? What does that stat mean? What that means is that Caleb was inaccurate. He should have been hitting the passes. He was not putting it in the right spot, which is stuff that we already saw. Like this is not rocket science. The throws were off. They weren't great. They were out in the open. Like there was a couple things that he should have been able to complete. So next time, got to be more accurate, right? These are all things that we've talked about before. But the last little bit that I just want to talk about and conclude with Caleb Williams that I thought was a little bit interesting was just how many stats, or when was he blitzed, when was he kept clean, and also play action versus no play action, and screens versus no screens. So 72.7% of his passes, he was kept clean, with 27.3 under pressure. And when you look at the PFF grades, 59.5 when kept clean, 35.5 when under pressure. But also when you look at it, only a quarter of his passes, he was under pressure. But the time to throw during those situations, 4.14. So when he holds the ball on a little bit longer, as you imagine, then he's pressured. But also when he was blitzed, he was only blitzed around 35% of the time. And with that, it was 30. He had a PFF grade of 34.3. Also, when you look at the passing concept numbers, 15% play action. So not as high, I think that a lot of us were expecting, especially with us trying to establish the run, but we never established the run. So it seemed like with the pressure, it seemed like it kind of threw off the game plan. Really not a lot of play action out there for this team, but 21% screens. So a pretty high number of screens that we were calling out there, which makes sense because this is a rookie's debut. You don't want him doing crazy stuff, hence the low ADOT numbers, the average depth of target, and other things like that. So that's Caleb Williams for you. That's kind of what we have for him. But I want to go over to the running stats, where if you look at the running stats, DeAndre Swift, the name of the game was run it left. So DeAndre Swift had 7 carries to the left-hand side. But when you look at total carries, where they were going, we had 5 total carries go to the right-hand side. Besides that, we had 11 carries go to the left. Thought it was interesting that, hey, we were trying to favor that left-hand side. Maybe they didn't want to be testing Harold Landry, but they were really favoring Braxton Jones and Tevin Jenkins rather than the right-hand side. But on the left, it wasn't necessarily great because on the left-hand side, 7 attempts for 30 yards for DeAndre Swift. On the right-hand side, he just had 2 attempts for only 2 yards total. So really, like, I don't really understand that. Like, Darnell Wright was doing well. They weren't running it to the right-hand side. That's where I thought it was interesting. Like, I know Nate Davis, they don't trust fully, but come on, you got to run it to the right-hand side. And when we go deeper into the blocking numbers, you'll see that Braxton Jones did not have a great game when it came down to run blocking. And that's a big reason why they weren't able to get the ball going on the ground, especially because when they were trying to go around the left end, they had 7 carries for 17 yards for 2.4 yards a carry. But also a little bit of stats on DeAndre Swift. Next Gen Stats tracks an efficiency metric, where the efficiency metric is basically it's calculated by taking the total distance a player traveled on rushing plays as a ball carrier, according to Next Gen Stats, per rushing yards gain. The lower the number, the more north of a south runner you are. The higher efficiency number is then the least, you're not really running north and south, you're running east and west, so you're running side to side, kind of doing a lot of dances. Typically what we've seen with when Luke Getsy was here, very efficient runners, very run straight and go. And I've always said that's the way to go. Just run, don't dance, just go. DeAndre Swift had the second worst efficiency rating at 6.68. So what that means, a lot of dancing in the backfield. A lot of dancing. A lot of people, like really good ones, is around 2, and we're almost to 7. So bad efficiency rating, lots, which equates to a lot of dancing in the backfield, a lot of east and west movement. But also, fun fact, we had the 5th lightest boxes that we were facing, but still we weren't able to efficiently run the ball, which I was baffled by. We faced, when DeAndre Swift was in the backfield, 10% of his downs when he was running faced 8 or more defenders in the box. Yet again, when you have lighter boxes, you should be running the football. Bears were facing lighter boxes, and ultimately they were not able to get yards when running. Also, 3.26 seconds for DeAndre Swift behind the line of scrimmage, which was the third slowest in the entire NFL, and also minus 1.02 rush yards over expected, which was the 7th worst among running backs in the NFL. So what does this mean? It means that DeAndre Swift was not good. And this kind of contradicts, and yet again, this is why I like some of the data. PFF likes how DeAndre Swift was hitting people and trying to get around and breaking tackles. But when you look at the next-gen stats, the next-gen stats tell a different story. The next-gen stats say, hey, he's hanging out in the backfield a long time. He's dancing a lot, he's doing stuff like that, which could also mean that, hey, there's a lot of people around him. But you didn't really see a lot of up-the-middle runs because of those defensive tackles. That's another one of the big pieces. They really were trying to bust it outside because they were terrified of Jeffrey Simmons and T'Vondre Sweat up the middle. So yet again, just an interesting little statistic there, and that kind of tells some of the story. But then next, the receivers. A little bit on the receivers. Not a lot of receiving statistics that we can kind of get, but a couple little fun facts. Keenan Allen, when lined up, received on average 6.3 yards of cushion. So that means when he's lined up, how far is the cornerback away from him? While DJ Moore had 4.7 yards of cushion, which was 5th least. So what that means, they were playing up more on DJ Moore, which ultimately probably meant that people were then playing deeper in the back half. So they were trying to just press up for anything close. Also, when you look at separation, DJ Moore had the 10th worst at 2.3, and Keenan Allen 23rd worst with 2.7 yards. And the separation metric is what happens when the ball is thrown to them. So when they catch the ball, how much separation do they have from the wide receiver, or when at the time of throw, just to kind of say, okay, did he get open? How open was he during that? And then last but not least, average yak over expected. Keenan Allen, negative 0.6 yards of expected yak over expected. And DJ Moore, which I found interesting, had the second worst average yak, average yak rate at negative 2 yards per reception, which I thought he made some extra tackles, but then I realized it was an end around. That's when he got the extra yards, but they didn't really like what he was doing. So not a lot of love out there for our Chicago Bears. But also when you look at just the separation metric, the only person that had above the average, so league average is 2.96. Rome Odunze had the highest at 3.19 at the time of reception, but also too, the ball was in the air. He caught it. So kind of a little asterisk there. Basically, when the ball was being thrown, people were closer to their wide receivers than on average. So Caleb Williams was throwing into tighter windows than the average quarterback when throwing it and throwing the attempts over to his wide receivers. So what else do we have? I want to go to the offensive line because these are some of my favorite metrics that we have out here. So with this is the beautiful blocking map of how well everybody did. So the people that did above average when it came down to passing grade: Braxton Jones at 75.9, Darnell Wright at 83.3, and Nate Davis at 73. The people that had below average pass grades: Coleman Shelton, obviously, and then also Tevin Jenkins at 48.7. And I'll tell you this, when I was rewatching the game, I didn't realize how bad Tevin Jenkins was against the pass. Like, any time that I was watching, it seemed like every single snap, he was getting cooked back. And I got to give some kudos to Caleb for standing in strong, because if that was happening to Justin Fields, he was running. He was out. Like, the amount of pressure Tevin was being pushed back, it was bad. So, yes, Coleman was bad, but Tevin, bad pass blocking game for him. And when you look in true pass sets, so these are like third downs, areas that you know that they're going to be passing the football. Braxton Jones, Ryan Bates, Darnell Wright, Nate Davis all scored above expected and all scored around 80. So very, very good in those true passing sets. But Tevin Jenkins, a 12.5 grade, which is terrible, terrible. And Coleman Shelton at 50.1. So when you talk about who to blame, if we want to put who to blame that kept on putting pressure, it really was up the middle. It was Tevin Jenkins, Coleman Shelton on those true passing sets. When we need to pick up the first down, when we need to be throwing the ball, that's when they were getting beat the most. But also when you look at efficiency ratings, so efficiency isn't a win blocking or win percentage. It's more so just it's the amount of passing snaps you had, and did you let up a pressure? So did they affect Caleb? Did they get into the face of Caleb Williams? Did they hurry him? Stuff like that. It's not a true pass win rate type of deal. But 95.5 for Coleman Shelton for efficiency rating. So that's bad when you break it down for center. We already knew it. The grade, the tape already showed that. But last but not least, run block grade. Darnell Wright was about average at 61.4. But PFF really liked Tevin Jenkins, Coleman Shelton, and Nate Davis, all scoring above average when it came down to the run grades. But then Braxton Jones and Ryan Bates, both below average in run grades. And I agree. We weren't able to get the run game going. Braxton Jones, I think, really did struggle, which I'm still waiting for him to look like rookie Braxton Jones when he was amazing at running with his run grade, but then pass grade was like, okay. I'm waiting for that run blocking Braxton Jones that I really loved watching on tape. But ultimately, those are some of the offensive line grades. But also, when you talk about just some of the other win rates that we have as well, I have some more little stats. More love for Darnell Wright. Darnell Wright was 16th among all offensive tackles, according to ESPN Analytics, saying that Darnell Wright won 94% of his snaps, which great in pass blocking, but also was only doubled, so only helped out 24% of his pass blocking snaps. That is incredibly impressive, because when I was looking at other people that had some of the top pass blocking win rates, they had like 30-something% double teamed. But with Darnell Wright, 24% double team rate and 94% pass block win rate, which is very good. Like we said, 16th highest among all tackles, left and right in the NFL. So Darnell Wright looks like a beast, doing very well in pass pro, just have to be better when it comes down to the run blocking. But I have a little bit more stats, and then we'll be done, and we'll shift over to the defensive line. If you look at the ESPN metrics, the Chicago Bears, 18th ultimately in pass block win rate at 58%, which is not great. The run block win rate for the Bears was 13th, which I thought was interesting, like pretty high at 74%. But when you look at the pass rush win rate and run stop win rate, when we come down to the defensive line, the run stop win rate was a little low, 19th at 28%. So as we know, run stuffing needs to get better. We can get better at that stat. But guess who had the number one pass rush win rate across everyone in the NFL? That's right, the Chicago Bears at 71%. They were winning against the people in front of them, so on the different snaps. So the Bears, very, very, very good when it came down to their defensive line. And when you look at if we go deeper into the metrics, one second, when we look at why they were so good, and I'm staying with the ESPN metrics, when you look at who they qualify as defensive tackles, we look at DeMarcus Walker, And like what we've said on this show, DeMarcus Walker should play D tackle. At defensive tackle, DeMarcus Walker had the number one pass rush win rate at defensive tackle, according to ESPN Analytics, at 60%. He was double teamed on 62% of the snaps as well. So he was just dominant at the defensive tackle spot. Keep him out there. Keep him in the middle on those third down snaps. DeMarcus Walker came out with a vengeance. Great game for him. But also at the defensive tackle spot, Andrew Billings and Gervon Dexter were tied at 7th with a 24% pass rush win rate. So great stuff. Billings double teamed 73% of the time. Gervon 45% of the time. So going against at least two people at one moment. So very, very, very good from this entire defensive line, especially the D tackles, which we kind of had some questions about, but it just showed Billings did well, Gervon did well, and when they shifted Walker inside, he did very well as well. But also from the ESPN standpoint, Darrell Taylor was number 2 among defensive ends with a pass rush win rate of 47%, but a double team rate of 5%. So just yet again, flying off the end, nobody really double teaming him. He was just able to just run by people and do well. So also another stat that I just want to show, the league average for defensive linemen as they were trying to rush the passer was 4.56 yards of separation from the quarterback. Montez Sweat and Gervon Dexter were slightly below average at 4.64 and Gervon Dexter at 4.69. Montez Sweat getting chipped a lot and just kind of, they ultimately wanted to take Montez Sweat out of the game and let everybody else do their job. Darrell Taylor, 3.33 yards of separation from the quarterback on average, significantly better than that 4.56, and Walker at 3.88. So just more stats pointing to the Bears as the defensive line with more and more defensive dominance. And now, let's flip over to what the PFF numbers have. And this is where I kind of want to know the difference. I don't ultimately know the difference between the different win rates because PFF's win rates are a lot lower than ESPN's. ESPN's are typically a lot higher. So I don't know if PFF truly categorizes it as I think how they categorize it is, did you truly beat your man? So like when Darrell Taylor, who they gave an 8.7% pass rush win rate, which is very different than the 47% win rate that ESPN gave them, I think that they might not like him just because he just runs by them. He just blows by them like that and then gets to the quarterback rather than truly like putting a move on them. But no matter what, DeMarcus Walker, 25% pass rush win rate, Billings at 18.2, Chris Williams at 14.3, Gervon at 11.5, and Montez at 10%. And something that I also want to call out is the people that did better at the true pass sets or did even which was Darrell Taylor, 84.2 in a true passing set, and also came away with 2 defensive stops. Really just shows more about Darrell Taylor. When he comes in on those designated third down situations, he's able to pin his ears back and really just chase after that quarterback. So, some pretty cool stats out there, but now let's get down to the final little pieces, and then we can call it a day. Last little bit that I just want to talk about is just the coverage statistics. Not too many that are out there. We already talked about how just the level of dominance that Jalen Johnson had. But when you look at the average separation that their wide receivers had upon completion, so this is the NFL Next Gen stats, the average in the NFL is 2.96. All their wide receivers had below that, including Okonkwo. So Okonkwo, their tight end, 2.73. Burks was at 2.28 yards of separation. Ridley was at 2.34 yards of separation. And Boyd, 2.38. What that means, our boys at corner are good, right? That's just the confirmation. The Bears corners are freaking good. We already know that. But the last little nugget that I have is just some more of the PFF statistics about the average separation that the Bears, or more of the cornerbacks and coverage snaps. So when you look at their stats, we talked about this with Jalen Johnson, 1 completion for -2 yards, 1 pass breakup, 1 interception, so 1 of 3. But I want to highlight Tyreek Stevenson. because Tyreek Stevenson, coverage grade of 78.3, was targeted 9 times, only 3 completions for 42 yards. Pretty darn good, right? Only averaging 33% completion to him, broke up 1 pass and intercepted another. So very good game for him. But also, I want to highlight our linebackers. T.J. Edwards with a PFF grade of 91.5. But when you look at the stats, you see, well, they threw it at him 9 times, 9 completions. So 100% completion rate when they were targeting him. But the key number here, ladies and gentlemen, the ADOT, which is that average depth of completion, at only 1.7 yards. So what does that mean? T.J. Edwards, the only completions that he's allowing is at 1.7 yards. Very, very short. And then stopping him within 3 yards. Very good play out there by T.J. Edwards. Very cool stuff to see. But also Tremaine Edmonds, 2 for 2 when targeted, but still average ADOT of -3 yards. So they're literally throwing it behind the line of scrimmage in order to throw it out there. So good stuff all around for this team. And let me know, what did you think of this show? This is a little different than what we normally do. We always like to kind of go through some of the stats. So man, I had a half hour of stats for all y'all. What did you think? Did you love it? Did you not like it? Do you want to see more of this? Because if so, show the channel some love, subscribe, like, comment. It helps out the channel tremendously. Share this out with your friends because you're not going to get coverage like this anywhere else. And with that, Unbearable Sports Podcast, we are out.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair, and you know that she's a